Hi everybody, my name is Lana Burgess and I am the faculty curator at the McKissick Museum, which is a part of the University of South Carolina. This is my first time doing an Ask a Curator, and so I'm going to ask for somebody to tell me, can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay? How's it going from your end? Oh, great, good. Okay, we've got some folks joining us this evening. Well, welcome. I just want to repeat again for those of you who will be coming in as we're just getting started a little bit after 6:30. I'm Lana Burgess and I am the faculty curator at the McKissick Museum at the University of South Carolina. Now, I want to tell you a little bit today. If you've watched our last video, you've heard our curator of collections, Christian Chichi Murray, talk about McKissick and our mission and our collections. But I want to tell you a little bit today about what I do, because the name or the title faculty curator is something that I still scratch my head over and other people scratch their heads over as well. So the faculty curator is a person who, it's a historic title, and it is a person who is someone that is on faculty at a college or university and works with collections. But in my case, it's much more of an academic engagement curator. So my responsibilities are really to work with faculty, staff, and the students, of course, most importantly, to work with McKissick Museum and use our collections in their classes, in their projects, and in their research. Now let's look over and see who's joined us. And now that we're a few minutes into the video, I want to make sure that we've got some time to answer questions, because if we were at the museum, I'd be giving you a tour and telling you what I'm thinking, but I want to know what you're thinking and what questions you have. So if I can just scroll over here, let's see. Oh, good. We've got some folks from Clemson. Fantastic. Hi, Larissa. Hi, Kelly. Oh, Leela. Hey, Leela and Jackie. So we've got some of our former students working with us or visiting with us tonight. Great. Oh, the owls are back. It's good to see you again, or hear you, or see you represented in the comments, owls. We always appreciate your support at McKissick Museum. All right. So McKissick Museum, as I mentioned, we tell the story of Southern life through community, culture, and the environment. And it's an important mission for us to look at the southeastern region and the traditional arts, many of which Christian talked about. Another part of our mission, however, is our academic mission, as I mentioned from the beginning. And that, of course, is to use our collections in the classroom and out in the field. So do we have any questions about how we do that? Or do I see any questions or comments? Well, I know there's a bit of a delay. So before I answer any of your specific questions, I've had some questions that have come in prior to this event. So let's see who, some of these questions anonymously were sent to us. So let me see what I have here. One of the questions that was asked was, how did I end up at McKissick Museum? Now, there may be some people watching that may already know this story. But for me, it was a really great opportunity to sort of come back home. I did my master's degree at the University of South Carolina, and I took the graduate certificate in museum management, which is the program that I now direct, and went away, worked for a while at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts in Montgomery, Alabama, and then went back to school to Florida State University to get my PhD. Long story short, this new faculty curator position was created at USC, and I was able to come back home, work at the museum where I had already studied, and more than that, I got to work with my mentor, Len Robertson. So that is what brought me back to Columbia and to McKissick Museum. I'm not from South Carolina. I'm very fortunate that my family is, but it was the museum the job and my mentor and some other faculty that I had worked under, now working with, that brought me to McKissick Museum. And for those of you who haven't been to the museum, again, please take some time and look back at Christian's Facebook Live post to see and hear all about some of the exciting things that we have in our collections. Any questions at this point? Let's see here. We've got some folks in the chat. Okay, looking there. All right. Well, as I wait, in case you're still thinking, I know it's supper time, and a lot of you may just be here for a little listening, dinner conversation. I joked earlier with my colleagues and my husband, maybe this should be cocktails with the curator, but we thought I should be on my best game. So here I am. Another question that I was asked was, how can students utilize McKissick Museum? And I mentioned this briefly as I started, and there are a variety of different ways. One of the things that a lot of colleges and universities are moving towards, and really university museums have been doing this forever, is creating learning laboratories or experiential, outside of the classroom learning opportunities for their students. So of course, being able to have volunteers, being able to have interns, having students even come in for one-day activity, that's a great way in which we can have students learn about what we do as well as the things in our collections. In addition to having kind of that one-on-one mentoring, following, shadowing experience, we also give tours. My colleagues and I, Christian Chichi Murray has worked with her department in geology to write labs based on our collections and our exhibits. I've worked with other faculty to create unique and it's very specific tours based on what they're teaching. I think one of my proudest moments was working with the retail department and helping them figure out very simply how similar an display in a storefront, a window at a shop is similar to an exhibition, and that you have a lot of the same overlap in visual aesthetics. And so that was something that was really popular we did for a number of years. We give tours. We have people come in and shadow and intern. We historically have had a lot of graduate students and some undergraduate students come in and do their senior thesis with us. So researching individual objects or topics in which we actually have the physical, tangible object that they use as a primary source to help enrich their research and their writing. Okay, let's see. Cocktails with the curator. The owls like that. Yep, that's good. Linda Smith, who appears to be a top fan here. Hey, Linda. Thanks for joining us tonight. Do you need to be, her question is, do you need to be a student in the Museum Studies program to intern at the museum? Thank you for that. That's a great question. You do not have to be in the Museum Studies program to intern or volunteer at McKissick Museum. The Museum Studies program right now is only offered at the graduate level. So you either have to have a master's degree or a PhD, or you have to be concurrently pursuing a graduate degree to take the certificate classes. Now we hope to change that in the future, but in the meantime, if you want to take an internship at McKissick Museum for credit, then I'm your faculty contact. I supervise and serve as professor of record for internships in the Art History Division of the School of Visual Art and Design. But if you want to intern and you're from another organization or another institution, another college or university, and you happen to be coming home or spending time in Columbia, we'd certainly love to have you join us as well. One of my colleagues at the Smithsonian, Claire Jerry, said to me recently, there is no shortage of work in museums, there's just a shortage of positions. So we can be very creative as McKissick Museum and other museums in ways in which we can come up with internships and opportunities for our students and our volunteers. Now, one of the things I want to mention, since Linda kindly asked that question, is that we really embrace that idea of experiential learning, of giving practical experience to help prepare our future museum professionals. But given the COVID-19 situation, many university museums, college museums, and even private, public, national, international museums are coming up with creative ways to help our students intern remotely, whether it's doing transcriptions, crowdsourcing, writing Wikipedia articles on artists or figures that aren't known, creating lesson plans. There are a variety of ways in which, if you find yourself with some time on your hands, you can certainly intern and or volunteer, because museums always need the support. We are always understaffed pretty much no matter where we are. And it is, since this week is National Volunteer Week, we realize in the museum field we can't do it without all of our volunteers. So let's see, any questions? Oh no, we've got a couple people here who are reconnecting. So I guess this is a great thing. We've got some fans and friends of each other. Christian catching up with some folks from Clemson when she used to work there. I see a couple of other people. Looks like we've got some visitors, some guests from Georgia. Welcome, Peggy, welcome. Glad to see you from Georgia. Glad you could join us. Well, I'll take a minute. Let's see. Oh, small world, okay. Separate conversation going on. Let me get back and see if I have another question or two that I can answer for you this evening. Let's see here. So one of the questions that Christian got that I've also received is, what is your favorite piece in the collection? And I am a person that is much more nostalgic than maybe I would like to admit. And when I was a young person growing up, my grandparents had this cookbook, which I brought here today as a show and tell, called Charleston Receipts. Everybody see that? There we go. And when I was working on my master's degree, I had the opportunity to work with the family of an artist named Anna Hayward Taylor. Now, Anna Hayward Taylor worked in Charleston, South Carolina, as a part of what's known as the Charleston Renaissance. Think about, if you've studied art history or you've studied African American culture, you may have heard of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1930s, coming out of the Great Depression. This was a renaissance and a rebirth of the arts in Charleston, South Carolina. So Miss Anna Hayward Taylor was originally from Columbia, and her parents helped found the Columbia Museum of Art. I knew none of this. I just knew as a child that I had seen this cookbook, and in it was an illustration of, I don't even know where my camera is, sorry about that, cutting rice, which is a lino cut. Basically, it is a cut piece of linoleum to make this design, and it is then printed on paper in multiples. So when I came to Columbia and was given this opportunity to work on Anna Hayward Taylor and get to know her family, work with her primary correspondence, imagine my surprise when I saw this print in the family's collection, and immediately it triggered a memory from my childhood of seeing it in this cookbook. Now, don't be fooled. I did not cook anything probably with my grandmother, but I do remember seeing the visual and made that connection. So the long answer is, my favorite piece in the collection is that print by Anna Hayward Taylor called Cutting Rice or Harvesting Rice. And I was able to be a part of the donation. As a graduate student writing my thesis, the family was so pleased, or so they said, thank goodness, with the work that I was doing, that they agreed to donate that print to McKissick Museum. At the same time, I was in the museum studies classes that I now teach, and I was able to submit that as my what I would recommend to the collections piece and justify why it was important to have her in the collection, an example of her work, because we already had examples of other Charleston Renaissance artists. So it was a really great, fun memory for me, and that's why it is my most favorite piece in the museum collection. So Larissa she's talking about how much she loves the quilt exhibit, and it is quite a shame that we are closed and the quilt exhibit is not visible to you, but thankfully our programs still continue. And our executive director, Jane Prisby, will be doing some online quilt documentation days, the first Saturdays of each month up from May through July. So it will live on. So Leela Rice asks, what's your favorite exhibit to date? Well, now, Leela, that's a hard question. I assume you're asking about my favorite McKissick exhibit, because there are a lot of other exhibits in art museums that, as a trained art historian, I would have to admit that I may favor more than some of the things we do at McKissick. So my favorite examples at McKissick, though, would be the things that students have worked on. One of the most recent, in the fall of 2018, was an exhibition called Founding Feathers that looked at some extinct birds in South Carolina. It's a show that came out of an environmental history class. A couple of students presented the ideas, their proposal in the class, and then came to McKissick the next semester and said, we'd like to try to make this proposal into a real exhibition. It's one of my favorites because I still know very little about the subject. And it was exciting for me to learn through them and from them and with them as they explained to me who Rachel Carson is and Silent Spring. I'm embarrassed to admit I hadn't even, ever read the book, to figure out about these extinct birds. I had known Carolina parakeet, again, because Anna Hayward Taylor had done an illustration, but learning about the extinction and the environmental implications that had been going on much longer than what we're dealing with today. Now, I, of course, had heard of Chernobyl. I had followed Rudy Mankey's work there, but this really came full circle for me as a teaching, learning experience where you don't know which is happening first, the teaching or the learning, and who's doing which role, because we were all learning together. So that's probably my most favorite one at present. Let's see, the Owls ask, can I provide a link to the online quilt event? I have one I plan to bring in March. Yes, absolutely. Amanda may be able to help us with that. Providing a link. I believe the events are on the Facebook page and it will be a Facebook Live. If they're not on Facebook Live yet, they will be up shortly. So please, yes, if you have quilts and you're still interested in that, that is such an important part of what we do and what we collect. And we want to continue documenting South Carolina quilts so that we can continue to expand that quilt survey that has been documented for, now 40 plus years at McKissick. Any other questions? How are we doing on time? Wow, it goes so quickly. Okay, let's see. Another question I have. How do I decide what will fit in with the theme and feel of an exhibit? How do I decide what will fit in? So building an exhibition, I suppose, is just like making a fabulous meal or, writing a book or a television show. I don't know. You start with your most wanted list, the things that you most desire. I tell my students to not cut back, not censor themselves, just go big as they can as far as their ideas, and then we pare down from there. So sometimes objects and deciding what fits in often relates to what's available, either what we have in the collection or what we have available to us from loans, if there are financial restrictions as far as lending things, if there are environmental concerns. So a lot of it really is practical. Other things too, when you start writing about the objects that you're finding and researching, you may find that the object is really bang, wow, pow, beautiful, but it doesn't have that compelling story or history, or it just doesn't really fit in the narrative, and you may be trying to force it into the narrative because it is such a spectacularly visual or historically compelling artifact. So those are just a few ways in which you really have to decide what will fit in with the theme and the feel. Thinking about it beyond objects, I think about it too. I work very hard with my students to work on visual sort of branding. For those of you who are in fields outside of museums, you're probably familiar with branding. Certainly we all watch commercials. Some of us are brand loyal. Some of us, can quote theme songs or colors related to certain brands. So we try to have some kind of visual signifier or identifier that is carried throughout the exhibition. And in order to have the objects fit the narrative and the design, and vice versa, we really have to think about what are the objects, what is their time period, what are we trying to convey. I guess an example I can provide, at least through description, is I worked on an exhibit called it was part of a women's well-being initiative. And we worked with young women, or we worked with a group of faculty who worked with young women in the juvenile detention center. And the work that they were doing, they were expressing themselves through art, whether it was through collage or painting t-shirts. And it was really to be an expressive and empowering experience. So I decided to use hot pink as the background. We covered all of our cases, everything, so that it was a very shocking, jarring, in-your-face color scheme and design as you came in, so that you would feel like, okay, this is something that's important that I need to look at, or wow, I'm getting hit over the head with this because, perhaps these young women are overlooked in our society and need our attention or our help. So trying to think about what fits in that way is a part of my thought process as well. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for putting up information about the next Quilt Documentation Day. I'm looking, are there any other questions? Anybody got anything else? Well, I'm certainly not ready to end, so I'm going to talk a little bit more. My students, if they were watching, would not be surprised by this at all. One of my greatest challenges in class is trying to let them talk. And if any of you are watching or out there, I just want to say a shout out to the collections class this semester. They've done a marvelous job transitioning to taking a very practical class online. I appreciate their patience with me, and I'm really enjoying hearing their voices in their ethics presentations. For the first time, we did some recorded presentations, and it really, really means a lot, and you don't realize how much you're missing that personal connection until you're hearing those recorded voices. So thank you. So a couple of other things I'm working on. Amanda asked me to mention, I am just finishing up a fellowship with the College of Arts and Sciences Incubator for Innovative Teaching. And one of my projects, or my main project as a part of this project, incubator, was to write a game, a Reacting to the Past game. Reacting to the Past is a brand. It's an identifier for immersive role-playing games based on historical events. And so I've been working to create and write a curatorial game, because even though this group of faculty and all of these games that have been published have been ongoing since 2004, they have yet to have one that has a curatorial role. One of the classes I used to teach was called, since it had to do with controversy and censorship. And so trying to think about museum exhibitions from that point of view is sort of the content on which I'm building my game. But I'll stop for a minute because the owls have asked, do I have a favorite museum to visit out of state and overseas? Well, I grew up going to museums and more so festivals in my hometown of Pensacola, Florida, and sort of the expansive areas of the Northwest Florida coast. but probably my favorite growing up was the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. I had family living in Atlanta. I had aunts and uncles living in Atlanta, and I can remember berating them with questions every time I visited. Do you think I could ever work at the High Museum? Now, these people are not museum people. They're not necessarily nonprofit people. They certainly appreciate culture, but sure was the answer. You know, you can do anything you want. Very supportive. So the High Museum was my favorite museum for a long time. And then I had the pleasure of getting to study and then visit the Walter Anderson Museum in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Now, prior to Hurricane Katrina, this was quite a little gem, and it still strives to be. And what I love about this museum is that they captured the essence of his paintings and his prints in the design of the architectural design of the building. So it's very much like an old beach house with a tin roof, and it's a magical place, at least for me. Overseas, I have traveled very little overseas, and I don't know that I could pick. I've only been to Paris and to London, but I would have to say probably the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, which is in the old train station and has a lot of the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist and early Modernist pieces. So the Musée d'Orsay. Of course, any of these monuments, such as the Notre Dame Cathedral, you know, any major monuments also appeal to me as well. So we're looking at 6:58, and yes, one of the distressing things is you can't go to the eye doctor, so I'm doing a lot of this because my vision is out. And yeah, sorry, I got distracted because boy, I'm realizing how much I can't see. But I've just been asked, oh, I made a mistake in talking about my favorite museum. My dad just chimed in and asked, what about the Ogden? You are absolutely right, Dad. Thank you. The Ogden Museum of Southern Art in New Orleans, Louisiana, another one of my favorites. I have a strong affinity for art of the Southeast, American art, regional art, folk art. So the Ogden Museum in New Orleans, thank you, is very much in probably the top 5, if not the top 3. Anybody else? Any other last minute questions? Well, I really want to say I appreciate you taking the time to be with us this evening. It was fun. We're certainly trying this out as a new program. We're trying it out at different times of the day so that we can be available. I thank you so much for spending your evening with me, especially during supper time. And before I go with the remaining few seconds, I just want to let you know that we have a really exciting exhibition schedule coming up. Whether or not the McKissick Museum opens in the summer or the fall or even next year, which we don't anticipate, but we will be programming not just through programs like this, but we will be putting our exhibits online. A really important exhibit coming up because it is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and the women's right to vote is an exhibit called A Woman's Right. It has been curated by an undergraduate whose name is Hannah McGraw, and Dr. Jennifer Gunter, who is the director for the South Carolina Collaborative for Race and Reconciliation. And it deals with, in the second part coming up in the fall, the history of women at the University of South Carolina from 1945 to the present. So a lot of equal rights amendment stuff, a lot of really provocative, difficult times in the history of the university, and the history of civil rights and equal rights for people of color, for women, for trans people. So I really encourage you all to be on the lookout for that. We'll also be putting up another iteration of the quilts. And then coming up next year, we'll have kind of a niche exhibit on the on knives, handmade knives, the blades, the bladesmithing, and all that goes into sort of that niche traditional art. So thank you all very much. I'm going to sign off. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you for your questions and your time. And again, we're telling the story of community culture and the environment at McKissick Museum, and we appreciate your support. I'll say one last thing. Midlands Gives is a fundraising opportunity that's coming up on May 5th, and we encourage you to support McKissick Museum and all of our folk life and fieldwork, research, and programs by giving to Midlands Gives this year. Thanks so much. Hope to see you soon. Have a great night.